Okay, well, I guess we're getting ready to start and everything like that. So thank you everyone for being here this evening. Thank you for everyone who's joined us via Zoom. We're glad you're here. We'd love to see you in person next time. So let's hope that happens, but this is also a different alternative. Just to start out, this is being recorded, so we are going to be posting it on social media as well as on YouTube. So you can like and share it and refer to this later with any questions that you have. First up, we have Corrine Reeves with Nelson Elder Care, and she is going to be sharing, with,
Let's edit.
yes, with the Marcus Autism Center, and she is going to be sharing with us some tips and tricks to help us with our nutrition needs. So welcome, Corrine.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Corinne. I am a dietitian with the Marcus Autism Center, specifically the feeding program, and I work with kiddos who have feeding disorders. And within that large umbrella are also a wide range of kiddos with different developmental and intellectual disabilities. So I work very frequently with children with autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, Billy Prater, cerebral palsy. So I was really excited to get the opportunity to come. Yeah, I'm going to talk louder. I was really excited to get the opportunity to come and talk with you guys today. Here, let me get out of the way and we can see that better. I also just opened up my private practice, Jacobs Hayes Nutrition, LLC. I have some business cards and contact information up here. If you guys have any questions after the presentation that you couldn't think of right after the presentation, it's very new, so I don't have quite as much promotional material here, but if you get in contact with me, I'd be more than happy to help you out. But today we're going to be learning about the nutrition basics for adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Would you be able to go to the next slide, please? So the main objectives of the presentation will be to identify the main nutritional goals for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, review the fundamentals of Myplate, learn how to build a balanced meal using preferred foods and how to introduce new foods, and discuss ways to incorporate foods that require minimal preparation into meals. So first, there are three main goals that we want to make sure that we are addressing when it comes to any individual, especially those with developmental and intellectual disabilities. The first being adequate nutrition, which leads into individualized nutrition, and then health promoting nutrition, and we will discuss these on the next slide. Adequate nutrition at the bare minimum meets caloric and nutritional needs. And also make sure that food is safely prepared and stored. So different things to take into consideration with this is the food prepared at the correct texture. Is the liquid at the right consistency to make sure that the person is able to safely eat? Is the food being properly prepared and properly stored? And if we have an individual who might have two feeds, are the feeds being administered safely and excess formula being stored properly? And then lastly, we also need to identify and eliminate any barriers that might be in place or that might interfere with this adequate nutrition. First is access to the grocery store. Do you live near a grocery store? Sometimes it can be really hard to get to the grocery store. So do you have transportation to and from there? Also, do you have the appropriate appliances required to prepare these items? This can often mean a microwave, a stove, or a blender. And also coverage for formula and feeding supplies. These things are often expensive. So if you're having to pay out of pocket for it, that might make things a little bit difficult when there could potentially be some insurance coverage there. And then, of course, are there sufficient funds just to make sure that we are able to achieve adequate nutrition? Next is individualized nutrition, and this takes into account the individual. This manages individual medical conditions, such as the ones that we're talking about here, the developmental and intellectual disabilities, but also any comorbidities that might come with those. Some that I see on a daily, allergies and some GI disorders, that could be something as simple as constipation to something as complex as celiac disease. And then of course it respects personal preferences, dietary restrictions, whether that be for cultural, spiritual, or just personal preferences, and likes and dislikes. I personally eat quite a plant-based diet. Part of that's because it makes me feel good, but the other part of that is because I really don't like to touch meat. So if you don't like certain things, I'm not going to force you to eat them. And the last is health promoting nutrition. So health promoting nutrition takes into account individualized nutrition and adequate nutrition. It provides a variety of foods within each food group, and we'll review the food groups shortly. It has a balance of all foods within the food groups. It also takes into account any potential supplementation, whether that be a multivitamin or specific supplements. And lastly, for the population that you guys primarily work with and have experience with, a general healthful diet is best. Once we've taken into account adequate nutrition and individualized nutrition, really we can all put that into a general healthy diet. There is no one size fits all. Alrighty, so it's great that we have all these goals, but how do we actually implement them? So this might be easier for our in-crowd audience, but does anyone know what this is?
They can answer if they want.
Sure, you can type, you can yell it out.
Yeah. Myplate.
Myplate, okay, correct. And Myplate is divided into 5 different food groups. So we can start with a circle. Does anyone know what this food group is?
Water.
No. All right, let's. Does anyone know what the 5 food groups are? We'll break this graphic down in a second. But what are just generally 5 food groups? Does anyone know?
Dairy,
Meat, fruit, vegetables, carbs.
So I heard fruit, I heard dairy, I heard vegetables. We've got 3. Protein. Grain. Bingo. Okay, we can go to the next one. All right. So this is how the graphic for Myplate is divided. What do we notice about the Myplate graphic?
more vegetables.
Mm-hmm. Any other observations?
I don't see fats and sugars in there.
It's hard to break those down because fats, protein, carbohydrates are what we would consider macronutrients, and they can fit into multiple categories of this. So food groups are grouped together based on the nutrients that they provide. And we'll get into key nutrients a little bit. But the biggest things for Myplate is if you were to create a plate, then half of your plate would ideally be fruits and vegetables, with vegetables taking up a little bit more of the plate than fruits. Grains take up a little bit more of protein because they tend to be fluffier, and protein tends to be a little more dense, and then dairy on the side, or you can throw some cheese on top of your meal, whatever looks best, or yogurt. Next. So now we're going to get into each food group individually and show you guys how many servings ideally someone should have each day and what a serving size looks like. So for women and men, it's a little bit different, but generally 1.5 to 2.5 servings each day. And a serving can look like a cup of sliced fruit, half a cup of dried fruit, 1 medium, so 1 medium apple, 1 medium banana, 1 medium orange, or have a large fruit. If you think of those big old Honeycrisp apples that are like the size of your head, those are my favorite. Those would count as 2 servings, and then 8 ounces of fruit juice. However, little disclaimer with the fruit juice, ideally we should limit fruit juice to 8 ounces because while it is providing some of the nutrients that we see down here, it is lacking fiber, and so it tends to have a higher sugar content than if you were to eat the fruit by itself. And the key nutrients that are provided by fruits are potassium, fiber, vitamin C, and folate. Next are vegetables, generally 2.5 to 4 servings each day. And that can look like a cup of raw vegetables, half a cup of cooked vegetables, 2 cups cooked leafy greens, or 1 cup raw leafy greens, because if you think of spinach, for example, when you cook spinach, it tends to wilt down really small, so you need a lot more of it to get the same serving size. And the key nutrients provided here are very similar to fruits, except for the big one, vitamin A. Those are going to be found in your bright orange vegetables, bright orange and yellow. Next are grains. Grains, about 5 to 10 servings per day. And a serving size can look like a slice of bread, a cup of dry cereal, half a cup of pasta, rice, or cooked cereal. And the general recommendation is to make half of your grains whole. So, for example, if you were to have 8 servings of grains throughout the day, then ideally 4 of them should be whole grain. And that would look like whole wheat bread, brown rice. I'm blanking right now on other, oh, thank you, on other grains, but it's generally if you see whole grain on the package, then that's what we're aiming for. That has a higher fiber content, but it still provides the same nutrients as a white rice or a white bread. And the key nutrients provided in grains, the grain category, are fiber, several B vitamins, including thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and folate, and then different minerals such as iron, magnesium, and selenium. Protein, about 5 to 7 ounces or servings each day. An example of a serving is an ounce of meat, poultry, or fish, about 1/4 cup of cooked beans, 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of peanut butter or other nut butters, and about 1/2 ounce of seeds or nuts. And the key nutrients provided in this food group are protein, of course, B vitamins, such as niacin, thiamine, riboflavin, B6, and B12, vitamin E, iron, zinc, and magnesium. And lastly, we have dairy and dairy substitutes. It doesn't necessarily have to be cow's milk. There's lots of great plant-based options out there for dairy. The recommendation for both men and women are 3 cups per day. And a serving can look like 1 cup of milk or milk substitute, a cup of yogurt or yogurt substitute, and 1.5 ounces of natural cheese, like 1/3 cup of cottage cheese. And the key nutrients provided here are vitamin A, vitamin D, riboflavin, B12, protein, potassium, zinc, magnesium, and selenium. All right, so you were asking about sugars and fats. So the other principle of Myplate, even though it's not a food group, are what we would call SOFAs and sodium. The biggest thing that they want to drive home is to limit solid fats and added sugars. That's where we get your SOFAs. Your solid fats are your saturated fats. So these are solid at room temperature. Does anyone know an example of a solid fat?
Lard.
Lard, yeah. Butter.
Cookie filling, like in an Oreo cookie? I don't know.
Cookies are actually vegan, fun fact. So there's no animal product in it. That's another thing with solid fats. They're going to be primarily from animal products. So think steak, butter, lard. Ideally, we would limit those throughout the day and aim instead for unsaturated fats, and these are liquid at room temperature. So our olive oils, canola oils, There's lots of fun oils out there now, avocado, grapeseed, etc. And then added sugars. Ideally should be less than 10% of overall intake. And we're gonna look at a label later and it can show you what that looks like on a label. And this is any sugar that's added to a product. This might be a little bit harder for our individuals who are primarily formula fed because you got to make the formula taste good if you're taking it by mouth. And sometimes there's some additional sugar in there to mask the medicinal flavor in there. And then lastly is sodium. Ideally, sodium should be limited to about 2,300 milligrams a day. And that's because the more sodium that's consumed, the higher, it's correlated with higher blood pressure, makes you retain fluid, which can in turn cause increased blood pressure. So the main Myplate takeaways are that each food group provides different nutrients and limited or no intake of a food group limits the key nutrients eaten, or it might even eliminate the key nutrient altogether. And ensuring meals that are balanced and eating a wide variety of foods makes sure that all nutrients are being consumed. So what does it mean to have a balanced meal? Ideally, we should aim for about 3 meals a day with 2 to 3 snacks. A meal consists of 3 to 5 food groups. So I had a breakfast burrito this morning for lunch. The tortilla was my grain, egg was my protein, I had cheese in it for dairy, and then a serving of fruit on the side. So I had 4 food groups at my meal. A snack should have about 1 to 2 food groups, with one of those having at least some protein or fat in it, because that'll keep you full for the next meal. And limiting grazing or snacking throughout the day. We like structured snacks. So snacks that are offered at specific times, and avoiding just kind of grazing or pecking throughout the day. Imagine like a pigeon. And this is what we refer to as mealtime hygiene. So we already talked about following a consistent meal and snack routine. For adults should ideally eat between every 3 to 4 hours. So if breakfast is at 6:30 a.m., then maybe a snack at 9:30, lunch 12:30, etc. Limiting that snacking in between, or the grazing in between. Having a dedicated space is also really important for meal times. It allows us to sit down and really enjoy our meal and also enjoy our company, which also comes with having positive interactions with family while eating. If we have negative interactions with family while eating, it might make us less likely to actually sit down at the meal and eat. All that's fine and dandy, but what if you have a picky eater on your hands? Luckily, I deal with a lot of picky eaters on a day-to-day basis. And one of the basic things that we do is to take inventory of what we call preferred foods. So these are foods that we eat readily with no hesitation and no coaxing. And so at the Marcus Autism Center, we take inventory and we list each food in each food group that someone will consume. Now, for someone who eats a wide variety of foods, this isn't as big of a deal, but for someone who might be a little pickier, this can come in handy. So let's say, for example, someone doesn't eat vegetables, but they will eat fruit. Fruits, if you can remember, provide very similar nutrients to vegetables. So even though we're not eating vegetables, and that's something that we can work on to add more variety into meals, fruits can often cover that gap while we're working on that. Protein, say for example, there's some limited proteins. Well, if they drink milk or the yogurt, that also provides some good proteins, so we can kind of overlap there. And then when working with a meal, if someone really likes chicken nuggets and French fries, for example, it's always easier to add to the meal than take away from the meal. So I would never want to take away French fries from someone. Rather, why don't we add a fruit to it so that we have a little more balance? You've got your chicken nuggets, which are protein. I would count the French fries as like a grain almost. It's starchy. And then your fruit brings in a little more variety. And with introducing new foods, we don't want to go all out. Typically, we recommend starting very small, ideally a pea-sized amount, and pairing it with preferred foods. So this allows the individual to look at the new food, pair it with the preferred foods, makes it a little less scary. If they try it, that's awesome. You can give lots of praise and encouragement. If they don't, that's okay. Even the exposure is important. It can take up to 15 to 20 times to expose someone to foods before they are willing to try it. So most importantly, don't give up. Also, some really great ways to introduce new foods is getting someone involved in planning meals. That might look a little bit different than picking out a recipe and going all out, but you can give different options. For example, would you want to try this dinner or this dinner? This food or this food? Very simple, but it still involves them in planning. And maybe browse the produce aisle in person or virtually. You can look at different fruits and vegetables on the store or in the store now. And I remember I had a kiddo once who really liked ranch and was very interested in trying cucumbers because they could dip it in ranch. So I encouraged parent and kiddo to go out together and browse the produce aisle for other foods that he could dunk into the ranch. And of course, make it a family affair. It can be very hard to make changes if only one person is doing them, but if the whole family is in on it, then it makes it a little bit easier. And of course, when making these changes, you can take it easy. I know if you're like me, you have a pretty hectic schedule, and so it's nice to have foods that are easy to prepare or are easy to rely on. And so there's really great options for that. One are frozen canned fruits and vegetables. It doesn't always have to be fresh. In fact, many canned frozen fruits and vegetables are peaked at the height of their season, so it's going to have the most nutritional density, and then they're flash frozen or canned. So often these items can be of higher nutritional value than if they were fresh and out of season. So right now, if you were to buy blueberries, for example, those blueberries would probably be very tart and wouldn't be quite as nutritious as if you were to buy a frozen blueberry. And this can also be great for those who struggle with texture. We at the feeding program always use frozen and canned fruits and vegetables because we know that the texture and the consistency is going to be the same every time. Whereas if you were to buy a fresh fruit or vegetable, it can be hit or miss. Grapes, for example. I'm a crunchy grape gal. I will not eat them if they're squishy. So I can really empathize with kiddos who refuse to eat bananas if they're a certain texture, or grapes if they're a certain texture. Also really stocking up your pantry with staples that are easy to prepare. There's really great options out there for grains, for example, dry and hot cereals. Oatmeal is always a great staple. Grits, cream of wheat, any other hot cereals. Pasta is quick to prepare. You can even get instant pasta that you can prepare in the microwave. Also instant rice. And then great options for proteins can be canned beans and fish. And of course, identify foods and meals that can be prepared quickly, and you can cook a favorite meal in bulk. So maybe there's a day of the week that you have a little more time and you can prepare a meal. Double the recipe, triple the recipe. Now you've got enough servings to last throughout the week. And often it can help to think ahead and plan out what the days of the week are going to look like to help avoid last minute dinners. While of course these packaged items can be very convenient, we also need to take into consideration how to be smart with picking our packaged items. So ideally, when it comes to canned fruits, for example, we want to look for fruits that are in 100% fruit juice. Avoid the ones that are in heavy syrup because that's going to have that added sugar that we talked about earlier. I also wouldn't recommend getting the no sugar added version. That's typically fruits that are in water and then have an artificial sweetener added to them, which might be appropriate for some individuals, but sometimes it can cause some upset tummy. And so I would ideally recommend the 100% fruit juice. Also, you'd want to look for items that are reduced or low sodium. You can't see it very well, but we've got a reduced sodium here, or this one's actually no sodium. And some sneaky sources of sodium include canned beans and vegetables, soups, and sauces. If you're unable to find those with the reduced or low sodium, then you can rinse your beans and vegetables actually, and it can reduce the sodium content by up to 40%. You can just stick it on there and get underneath the faucet. So this might be a little hard for you guys to see at home, but this is a Honey Nut Cheerios label actually, and I wanted to point out a couple of things. So who is, I guess, familiar with the nutrition label here? Yeah. What sort of things do you look for typically when you're looking at the nutrition label?
Sodium levels, sugar levels.
Awesome. So you're a pro.
No, I wouldn't say that.
So you've got your sodium levels here, and it'll give you the milligrams. So 200, 2,000, 300, or 2,300 is the optimal amount for a day. A serving size of this provides about 210 milligrams, which if we're looking at it without milk and taking into consideration a 2,000 calorie diet, which is what the nutrition label is based off of, that would provide 9% of your daily sodium. Added sugars is going to be found under carbohydrate. So the new nutrition label, which all food companies should be shifting towards, breaks down carbohydrate into dietary fiber, total sugars, and then added sugars. So in a serving of Honey Nut Cheerios, the total sugars are 12 grams, and the added sugars are also 12 grams. It'll also tell you protein content, and then over here is a breakdown of all the specific nutrients that are within a serving of Honey Nut Cheerios. Also, for those who have allergies, every food label will have a disclaimer of allergens. So this in particular contains almond ingredients. And of course, if all else fails, we can introduce a multivitamin to make sure that any nutrient gaps are covered. And with a multivitamin, I'm sure you're familiar with the gummy capsule or chewable version, but there are also powdered and liquid versions. I get really creative with hiding multivitamins sometimes, and the powdered and liquid versions are really great to sneak into things if necessary. Of course, we can also get a more concentrated or specific supplement for those who might be deficient in a certain nutrient, or maybe there's a certain medical condition that requires excess of a certain nutrient. Any questions?
Please feel free to unmute yourselves if you have any questions and ask that way, or if you like, you can type them in the chat and I will be looking at that. But we're welcome and want anyone to speak up. So.
Sure.
Yeah. Can you talk about the long-term effects on people that are the quantities that they're eating and if they're not moving?
Mm-hmm.
Like folks that are in wheelchairs?
Right. So for those who are in wheelchairs, it's really important to watch weight and maintain weight because an increase of calories can cause an increase of weight, especially when you're not moving. And with the sedentary lifestyle that comes with being in a wheelchair, plus having the extra weight on, it might lead to some other comorbidities like high blood pressure or type 2 diabetes. So with even our kiddos that are wheelchair bound, we do very closely monitor their weight.
Can you speak to how you can add the multivitamins and determine, how do we know if we're taking too many vitamins? Do we need to take a multivitamin? And how do we give vitamins to our individuals, things like that?
For a multivitamin, typically what I look at is, well, first, what's currently being provided by the diet. So if there's certain things that are missing from the diet, for example, dairy, then I know that that individual might not be getting as much calcium or vitamin D as they would be if they were eating different dairy sources. So for that, I would probably go for a more specific nutrient or supplement, such as a calcium vitamin D supplement. They typically go hand in hand because vitamin D helps the absorption of calcium. And when we're looking at giving it to an individual, maybe an individual likes candy or gummies, then there's lots of different gummy versions. Or maybe they like applesauce, and we can include a powder version in their applesauce. And once they eat all their applesauce, they have also received their calcium vitamin D supplement. Most multivitamins are going to touch a little bit of everything, but they're not going to provide an excess of something. I would be more concerned if you had individual supplements on top of a multivitamin. Also, if we're getting into the nitty-gritty of vitamins and minerals, you have fat-soluble vitamins and water-soluble vitamins. So your water-soluble vitamins can't be stored in the body. Your body's going to use what it needs and then get rid of it. So those are more likely to become deficient if you're not consuming them regularly, but it's also going to be hard to reach a point where it would be bad for you. Those fat-soluble vitamins can be stored in the body, and so if we're taking excessive amounts of those are more likely to reach a potentially harmful level. So there's kind of a lot of intricacies that go into that, but a general multivitamin should be okay to give somebody. Hi.
Yes, ma'am. Question for you. My son has Down syndrome.
Mhm.
Is all your references as far as servings, etc., those are for adults, but is his metabolism, I guess what my question is his metabolism slower than your quote unquote normal person per se?
Mhm.
Is there something that goes along with that where you need to decrease his serving amounts, or because he with Downs is overweight, as most Downs are?
Right.
My question is how do you combat that? Do you lower the caloric, or is it based on the individual, or how I don't question.
Yeah, good question. That's kind of where the individualized nutrition comes in. So for someone with Downs, they do have lower caloric needs due to some decreased muscle tone that kind of naturally comes with Down syndrome. With serving sizes, there's ways to incorporate all those serving sizes into your diet in order to fit those caloric needs. And you can focus on some lower calorie items within those food groups. So fruits and vegetables are naturally going to be lower calorically, unless they're some of our starchy vegetables. But then focusing on leaner sources of protein, for example, chicken and fish versus something a little bit higher calorically, like beef, or not to say that they couldn't have those things. I think everything can fit into a healthy diet. And then also, I think some sneaky sources of calories can often be drinks. So what are we drinking throughout the day? Juices, sodas, sweet tea. Those are going to be adding extra calories without necessarily adding anything nutritionally. Different snacks tend to be a little calorically dense, so being a little smart with our snacks. Really wanting to take into account the whole person. I wouldn't necessarily decrease any of the serving sizes, but seeing how we can make those serving sizes fit into the daily intake without overfeeding necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
To piggyback on that a little bit, I
Sure.
know that sometimes it's a timing issue whenever we talk about the 3 structured meals and some
Yeah.
snacks, especially with different medicines. I know sometimes that can
Mhm.
affect tummy issues or just certain people throughout the day just don't have the right appetite, let's call it,
Yeah.
especially depending on the medicine they're on. Do we want to add like the calories with some of the tastier stuff, like how you mentioned with the formula, it's sweeter, it has more sugar in it, just to keep that cycled throughout the day? Or is that just go back to that individual, what they want, I think?
So for medications, because every medication is a little bit different, right? Some medications are recommended to take on an empty stomach. Some you really want to take with a meal, but maybe you're not quite as hungry in the morning as someone else. I wake up pretty hangry in the morning, but not everybody does. So maybe if you have to take your medication in the morning, for example, we can find something like a glass of milk that's going to have some protein, fat, and calories for you to take with that medication. So you're not taking it on an empty stomach, but you're also not forcing yourself to eat a huge meal during the day. Or maybe you need to take it in the afternoon with a snack or lunch. Really, that's going to be dictated by whatever the medication requires, but there's ways to fit things into the day to work with your schedule. The 3 meals and 2 snacks throughout the day is kind of the ideal scenario, but of course, sometimes life gets in the way of that, and we don't always get to fit that into our day-to-day. But again, getting down to that individualized diet so that we can figure out what works for you. So what works for me doesn't necessarily work for everybody else.
I just wanted to make sure I understood. If you have to take medicine with food,
Mhm.
milk would count as following the directions.
Yes, depending on, I guess, how much food they want in your tummy. But that's gonna
In
give you-
general,
in
milk
general.
is okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know
a glass of milk, I would probably, what kind of milk would you guys drink, for example? I'm not a big milk drinker.
that. 2%, maybe 2%.
2%, perfect. 2%'s got a little bit of fat in it, got a little bit, it counts as a serving size of protein, so it's got 8 grams of protein in it per 8 ounces. So if you need to take your medication with something that's going to give you enough on your stomach to have a little bit of a cushion between that and the medication without feeling overly full. So yeah, milk's a great snack actually. For those of us that
Would juice count too? Apple juice?
I
Or
would
no?
not do juice. Juice is great for those who might need a really quick pick-me-up. For example, someone with type 2 or type 1 diabetes who might be struggling with low blood sugar. It can be absorbed into the blood system very quickly, but there's no protein or fat in it to really slow down the digestion. So something like an apple juice wouldn't be ideal for that scenario. If you want it with breakfast, that's fine. I think I'm over my time. But if you need me or have any other questions, please reach out. I think on the next slide, I have my email. If you can see it, it is jh.nutrition21@gmail.com. If you have inquiries, especially about appointments, then I can help get you guys set up with that. But I don't want to take up any other time, but I appreciate you guys letting me talk.
You did excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and next we have Josh Nelson with Nelson Elder Care here to talk to us about IBD, special needs, wills and trusts, and some stories I understand. So let's see what happens.
Thank you guys for joining us today. I'm Josh Nelson from Nelson Elder Care Law. Definitely appreciate Corinne sharing that information, especially about integration and how we get people to try new things. I think that's something we all struggle with, right? So just the idea of that's showing it, that perception, even if it's a pea-sized portion, I think I took away as a big help. And I want to thank Next Up Ministries for allowing us both to be here and speak with you guys tonight, because personally, I love the mission that you guys have here. And I think that it makes a world of difference in the people that come in and use you guys as services. So one of the questions you might be asking is, why is an elder lawyer up here talking to everyone? None of us are old, right?
Speak for yourself.
I'll tell you that elder law is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not named quite right, but this is what the legal community has given the name of what I do. I'm a trust attorney that specializes in government benefits. And that's why I'm presenting for you guys today, is because as we have people in our lives, our loved ones that are worried about what the interaction between government benefits and assets looks like, not only today, but in the future, especially if you as the caregiver could no longer do that role, what are the options? And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. I'm a very interactive speaker, and so at some point we'll unmute you guys on Zoom. Anybody in the audience, feel free to chime in as we're going through, and then we'll do a big Q&A at the end. But I also want to be respectful of you guys this time. And so one of the things that we offer at Nelson Elder Care Law is an absolutely free, no strings attached, come in and sit down with my associate Janet over here, and she'll walk you through everything that we do, kind of where you're at right now, and what options you might have in the future to change your situation if you need to, or maybe it's us just signing off saying you guys are good to go. One of the things that we focus on for tonight's talk, though, is going to be special needs trust, supplemental needs trust, and what is a Georgia ABLE account? When would we use the three different types of asset management strategies? Whatever we're talking through today, I'm going to ask you to take a couple notes. And so if you have a way to write these things down, go ahead and put on the first line, Georgia ABLE account. And what I'm saying there is A, B as in boy, L, E. Then skip a couple lines for me and write first person. You can just put one ST and then person, SNT. That's N as in needs, supplemental, or special needs trust. Skip a couple more lines for me and go ahead and put third party, SNT. And if you're not a lawyer, you probably look at all these things pretty much the same thing. So what are the circumstances when we want to use them differently? It all turns around on who has access to the funds, who controls the funds, and ultimately, can the state or the government come back and get paid back some for the benefits that they've provided to your loved one? That's the differentiator between these three. The ABLE account is the newest of these three. Right now in Georgia, you can put $16,000 per year into an ABLE account up to $517,000. Woo, that's big, right? These things used to be limited to like $30,000 just a few years ago. So we can put $500,000 in these things. How do we get $500,000 into it if we can only put $16,000 a year in? Multiple people. So this allows for you, your spouse, your brother, a charity, grandparents, all kinds of different entities can put up to $16,000 a year in here. So whenever you see that there's a $16,000 annual cap, it's not total, it's per party. There's some flyers in the folders that we have for people in the room, and I do apologize. They are outdated to last year. And so it says 15,000 in the flyer that you have, but it is 16,000, okay? What are some of the biggest advantages of this type of account? First, you can attach a debit card to it. Now, I know that sounds pretty non-fancy right now, but we haven't talked about the other two options yet. And so it promotes autonomy. It says that if your loved one is still independent enough to go out and use a debit card, we're going to empower them to do that. That's pretty cool. Because most of what we want for our loved ones is the ability for them to feel self-sufficient as much as possible. For them to be able to get out there and just go swipe that thing, man, that's got some power. This is the only one of the 3 accounts that you can do that on. The other big advantage to an ABLE account is that the money is invested with pretty low fees. Usually you're only talking about $40 or so in fees on this account annually. That's pretty good because most of you probably don't realize you're usually paying your financial advisor at least 1% on everything they control. What's 1% on $500,000? Because remember, this account can have up to $500,000 in it. It's $5,000 that your financial advisor would be getting paid if they only get 1%, and you got $500,000 in there. On these accounts, it's like $39, and then the more money you put in there, there's some extra little fees, but it's not that big. That's pretty cool. Now, there are some extra fees if you want paper statements, and because you're managing money for somebody else, you probably got to pay for the paper statements. But you can also open these accounts with as little as $25. And unlike other bank accounts, even if they have super low balances, they're not going to beat you up on the fees for them. The downside to these accounts is first, you can only put $16,000 a year in it. So if you're talking about an inheritance from a brother, a sister, a grandparent, if you're talking about an auto accident settlement, if you're talking about a malpractice case, this is not your vehicle to protect the assets. Or God, we hope not, right? What we're looking for then is a different tool for those things. And we'll get to those in just a minute. The other downside to an ABLE account is that the government that's providing whatever different subsidies or benefits to this person, whenever that person passes, they get paid back first. That's the downside to these things. That is bad. So what does that mean? Say that my daughter receives, on average, $18,000 a year in public service benefits. She has $50,000 in her ABLE account whenever she dies. Has she been able to direct that money to anybody else? No, because the state's going to come back and take all that remainder of her ABLE account is reimbursement for what they've provided. That's the downside to these. They do work sort of like your Roth IRA, where it's considered a qualified fund. What that means is that whenever you put money into it and you take money out of it, the growth is not considered capital gains. The catch, though, is you got to spend it on the right thing. So even whenever we're swiping that debit card, we have to make sure that we're spending the ABLE account funds on qualified expenses. Otherwise, not only are they going to be taxed whenever that money comes out, but there is a 10% penalty on that money too. So you're sitting here saying, Josh, everybody's told me this is such a great thing. Why does it not sound like that? It's because everything has its right purpose in place. For this particular instrument, I would argue that it is an amazing tool for you to put up to $16,000 a year in for your loved one that you want to have some autonomy. But this isn't going to be where you protect a big settlement or a big inheritance or something like that. The good news is qualified items for ABLE accounts is literally anything that you're going to spend it on. There's a couple caveats. You can't go buy a big screen TV. You can't go sit them on a big vacation. But transportation, helpers, medical costs, legal services, it covers a lot of stuff. How do you prove you spend it on the right thing? You gotta keep a bunch of receipts. And that is sometimes where the autonomy trouble gets started. You have your extraordinary loved one, they're going out swiping that card. How do we prove what they really spent it on? Because the receipt just says Walmart. The good news is these are pretty new. The IRS doesn't do really strict audits on them yet. SSI doesn't touch your benefits if you have less than 100,000 in this type of account. So there are some big benefits here. But I'd propose that for most people, there's a better solution. One of those better solutions is called a first person special needs trust. And so that's the second thing you wrote down for me. First person special needs trusts are for people under age 65. So let's start with that. Your person's over 65, this is not on the table. But what it does is protect inheritance and large settlements. Say that your loved one now is extraordinary because a doctor made a mistake. I have a client who had a surgery go very bad at 17, where iodine got into her lungs. That is a tragic, tragic medical incident that should have been something that the family never experienced. Her settlement from that is 6 figures. I want to be clear, I'm not a personal injury attorney. Not what I do. You need to call the biggest one you can find if you have a problem like this. But whenever they get those settlements, they're years down the road from when the incident occurred. And so usually there's a cash crunch or a financial burden for people going through this process. Most of these big malpractice cases take about 6 years from the time the incident occurred to the time the family gets money in their pocket. During those 6 years, you've been entitled to Medicaid health insurance, maybe SSI, maybe Social Security, depending on how old you are. But you get different benefits that are what are called means tested. You can't have too much in income and you can't have too much in assets, otherwise you don't get these things. And now all of a sudden you got a 6-figure check coming your way. What do you do with it so that all that work that you guys have already gone through as the caregiver of your loved one isn't wiped out whenever you got too much in assets? First party supplemental needs trust. What it does is allows for a third party trustee. So this is not creating autonomy for your loved one. This is you or somebody you know, love, and trust creating a trust, which is just a legal document, a set of contracts that holds that settlement check or that inheritance check from the grandparents that didn't quite plan the way they should have, so that you don't get kicked off benefits. The trustee of this trust can use the assets for anything that we talked about with the ABLE account, almost anything you can dream up. It would be hard to spend money on something that you aren't supposed to here. Car, if they can't drive, is probably out of the question. It's got to be for their benefit. It's supplementing their lifestyle. If they're on SSI, you got to play a couple tricks with rent. Rent is somehow harder than just buying them a house, so we hope that settlement check is big. But we know that with these programs, they have little nuances. The first person supplemental needs trust gets away from that, but it has some of the faults of the ABLE account. The government gets paid back at the end. So what does that mean? We were able to get government benefits from the time of our settlement all the way until we pass. That's the plus. But the state or the federal government get paid back first before other siblings or children, things like that. The next trust is my personal favorite trust, but you got to plan in advance. This is called a third-party supplemental needs trust. It is created by somebody aside from the person that's on benefits. Sometimes this is created whenever a parent dies. So it might not exist while you're alive. And in your will, it might say, whenever I die, everything that goes to my daughter goes into a supplemental needs trust. What's the really cool thing about that? It costs absolutely zero money to do it this way. That's pretty cool. What's the other benefit? if there's any money left over in this third-party trust, whenever my daughter dies, I, as the creator of this trust, could say that it goes to my other 2 kids or back to somebody else in my family, a charity like Next Up Ministries that I really like. We can go ahead and say that instead of my money going back to the state of Georgia and the federal government for reimbursement of these supplemental benefits, I can say where it goes. That's pretty cool. What's the one catch? It has to be a plan that's in advance. We have to plan this before the money actually becomes custody of the person that's on benefit. I got some confused face in the audience, so I want to make sure I'm super clear on this. If I die and my will does not have this one little paragraph in it that says everything goes to my child in a supplemental needs trust, if it just goes to Ava Nelson directly, she's got to do the first person supplemental needs trust because the money was hers. Instead, if all I do is put this one supplemental needs trust paragraph in my will, it goes to Ava Nelson's supplemental needs trust instead of her directly. It's never really her money. There's always a custodian, or what we call a trustee, that oversees it for her. A lot of people ask me, well, isn't that expensive? And the answer is no, because it doesn't have to be a professional trust company. This doesn't have to be Wells Fargo Trust Company. It doesn't have to be Merrill Lynch Trust Company. It could be your brother. It could be Ava's brother. It does not have to be a professional fiduciary. What does a non-professional fiduciary charge me every year to oversee his sister's trust? Probably nothing. That's pretty cool. So let me get this straight. It's the cheapest option out of the 3. It's the only one that allows us to be able to say that if there's any money left over, where it goes. Why would we not do this? Because we don't know. That's the problem for most people, is even as you guys go through this caregiver role, even as you're taking care of your children, your spouse, your loved ones, you know everything that is to be caregiving. We have people like Corinne that can tell us about nutrition. I love that. But unfortunately, us attorneys are really bad about helping people learn how to do this stuff. And if you'll notice, I talked about how cheap this was. That's really not how I make my money. But that's why we're out here trying to get you guys educated, let you know what options are available. Like I said, it's not always the right option because sometimes it's too late. If my mom dies and leaves my daughter money in her will, and she doesn't have that language in her will, it goes to Ava directly. Option 3 is off the table because it's hers directly. Now, option 1 and option 2 might still be there. More option 2 than the Ava account, probably. I'm hoping that she's getting more than 16 grand, but we never know, right? But what's the problem with option 2, the first party special needs trust? Goes back to the state. There's a good chance that all the money's gone. We all acknowledge that, right? If me as the sole caregiver isn't there to help her and she's not completely autonomous, I got to go hire care managers. I got to go hire in-home health. I pay for communities of healthcare. That burns through cash. One of the great things about having this supplemental income, whether it be an ABLE account, a first-party trust, or a third-party trust, though, is we get better choices. The government will provide what they see as a base level of care. Anybody that's been through this themselves knows that that's not what we want for our loved ones. And unfortunately, with our healthcare system, that little bit of extra money has choices. You get to pick which community you go to. You get to pick which caregivers you go to. You might get to pick the difference between whether you're sharing a room with 2 people, 3 people, or by yourself. And money buys you that. Want to go ahead and open it up to questions? What do we got?
Can your assets be put in that special need other than cash, other than?
Absolutely, great question. I'm going to repeat it just so that the people on Zoom can hear it. One of the questions that gentleman here asked was, can assets aside from cash be put into these different options? You can put only money into an ABLE account, only cash. For a first party or a third party trust, though, what I'm talking about is option 2 and 3, you can put any asset you own except for a 401k, 403b, 457, what we call qualified funds. Anything that's not considered a qualified fund can go into a first party or third party trust. So you could put your house in it. You could put your truck in it. You could put your timeshare in it. Now, timeshares are a whole nother little diatribe to get on, but you can do that. Another question? Yep.
My question is, I have D4A trusts for both my kids. Are those like gone by the wayside, or are those considered one of these?
What the lady, and I'm sorry, there's a lot of stuff on the screen, so I can't see who you are, but
Miss Tamara.
Ms. Tamara, what she's talking about is called a D4A trust. What she has set up here is essentially one of the two, first party or third party trusts. Most likely it's a first party, but the language in it, unfortunately, might mean that it's not. But from the name, we don't know. And this is an important fact. What I'm calling a first party trust or a third party trust will not appear on page 1 of your trust and say Ava's first party trust or Ava's third party trust, or in her example, Ava's D4A trust. As the attorney that drafts that trust, I could name it anything I want to. The name doesn't matter. A trust is just a series of contracts or agreements. And so unfortunately, we'd have to look and see what the wording of it is. I apologize about that, but you'd have the actual language. The thing that you're going to look for there is what happens whenever your loved one passes. If you nominated where it goes, probably a third party trust. If you haven't, probably a first party trust. And then again, the big thing that you have to check for is making sure that the money does not enter the custody of the person on benefits. Whenever that happens, you've lost the option of the third party trust. So if there's a life insurance check made out to Ava, that life insurance can only go first party. If that life insurance beneficiary, whenever I die, says Ava's SNT, now it's third party. If there's any money left over, you can go to her siblings or whoever.
Okay.
Let me make another quick moment on that just because I brought it up. Trusts are just paper. It's just contracts. In Georgia, they aren't even recorded with the county clerk. They're in your safe. Make sure that whoever's supposed to be the trustee after you knows where to find the thing. Do not put this in a safety deposit box. It costs $1,500 to drill open a safety deposit box whenever you have it planned properly. Make sure people know how to get this. With trusts, they aren't like wills. Copies usually count. And so it doesn't have to be like your original will, where the notarized wet signature one is the only one we have to safeguard. And lastly, trusts, make sure things like your life insurance policy say they're going to the trust rather than to your loved one directly. Another big thing that people always mess up with this, I apologize, but I'm going to be triggering. It's always the dad that's not in the picture that ruins this for everybody. It's a bank account. Every single checking and savings account that anybody on this call has can have what's called a POD, or payable on death, put on it. It is absolutely free to do. You walk into your bank, you say, I want to put POD on my account. It skips probate. You can designate that POD, or that payable on death, to your loved one's supplemental needs trust and save them a whole lot of grief on this. Because unfortunately, what often happens is a parent who's no longer in the picture passes away. It's always not enough money to do anything huge with, but it's enough to kick them off benefits. Remember that some of these programs have a $2,000 asset limit. Almost all of them have less than $10,000 asset limit. It doesn't take a whole lot to kick somebody off their health insurance. Not having this POD on there, sending something through probate will not only do that, but if your loved one doesn't have capacity to sign legal documents, even if you're the conservator, now all of a sudden you got to go pay another attorney called a guardian ad litem to review the paperwork at their hourly rate before you can get that money. It is a mess.
I have a question.
Yeah.
From someone online. Can the government go after any other assets in the person's name outside of the ABLE account after their death? For example, a house in the person's name.
Yes. So depending on the program, we have what's called estate recovery. And so the way that estate recovery works is kind of nuanced. It's a little bit beyond the scope of today's meeting, but I'll give you the 5-minute primer on it. Your estate, for collection purposes, is anything that goes through probate court. Probate court is the court that disperses assets from a decedent, somebody who died, to whoever, generally we think of it being loved ones, but it's actually to creditors first. The probate process is designed for creditors. They're going to have creditors through these programs, unfortunately. And so most of the equity in that home probably gets eaten up. There's ways to plan against that. Some of them are super easy. It could be what's called a joint tenants with right of survivorship deed. In order not to mess with Medicaid, health insurance, SSI, things like that, the timing of it is super critical though.
Once you were to create your trust and have it all, does it need to be reviewed regularly because the government's always changing things? Or the reason I ask is because like years and years ago, somebody said, oh, don't even do a trust because they can be so complicated. And
prior to 2011, trusts were a lot more complicated than they are today. If you have more than $5 million after 2025, they will be complicated again. If you have less than $5 million, a trust is not complicated. It's actually less complicated than probate. The way that most trusts should work, and again, just like the lady on the chat was saying, all trusts are different. But the way that a trust should be drafted today, if you have less than $22 million, should be simple.
okay.
The way the trust administration in our state works, which is really cool, I die, my wife comes in as my trustee, handles everything, within 2 weeks it's done. Me and my spouse are dead, I have to appoint somebody else. This would be like my sister, maybe it's my mom if she's still young and healthy, maybe it's another one of my kids if one of my children needs help. I'm generally not going to pick a professional trustee. Picking a professional trustee is expensive. Minimum fees on professional trustees annually tend to be around $18,000. If you don't have a lot of money, $18,000 a year just to manage this stuff isn't really doable. And that's why I say, like, prior to 2011, most people, it didn't make sense to do. If you got more than $5 million after 2025, unless there's some law changes, the laws that are on the books already will make it more complicated. Whenever I say $5 million, it's really 10 million for a couple too, though.
Oh, that's a lot of good information.
I know it's overwhelming, guys. One of the things that we do is just education. We know that once you realize what the options are out there, you'll make the best decision for you. And so you're welcome to come in and sit down with my team. I know for the people that are virtual, we'll figure out how to get that worked out. If you call into my office and you say that you are on this, we'll give you the free consult and everything, even though you aren't here today. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you. I want to really thank Corinne for coming out here. I think her information is transformational for a lot of us. And of course, Next Up Ministry is just always doing what they need to for us.
Right.
So thank you guys.
And Lori does it all. She's our.
Well, thank you too, Lee. for
No, thank you
doing
both for
this.
being here.
Thank you.
Making my first parent night awesome. And Matt, thank you for helping with this and everybody for getting this together. We're gonna hopefully be doing this like quarterly. And we're looking for feedback from everybody. Always want to know what you would like to see presented. So please email me, Lee, at nextstepministries.net anytime, or any of us, and we're gonna really try to present useful information for everybody in the community. So thank you for being here, and I really enjoyed meeting you. And
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank
it's
you so
been
much.
excellent.
Thank you.